Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's try that again. Good morning, everybody. There we go. Okay, it is good to be here at All Saints Church. My name is Mike Kinman. Mi nombre es Mike Kinman, soy rector. I'm the rector here. My pronouns are he, him. Mi pronombre son él. Welcome to the forum. And again, as I said a few minutes ago, congratulations to those of you who had to navigate road closures for the race. It is good to have everybody here. I am going to give just a very brief introduction. And first of all, let's open with a moment of prayer. God dwells in you. Let us pray. Holy Spirit of God, breathe into us, that as we breathe out, the words that come from our heart may be words of peace. That as you breathe into us, the actions that come from us may be actions of justice that lead to true peace. Open our hearts and our minds for this hour together. Help us to speak clearly and listen deeply. Help us to hear your still small voice in our hearts, in the spaces between words, and on the lips of one another. Amen. So I am absolutely thrilled and so deeply grateful to both of you for being here. We have Aziza Hassan and Andrea Hodos from New Ground, and I'm going to introduce them really briefly, but then I really just want to turn it over to the two of you and have you tell your stories of sort of who you are and how you met and sort of how New Ground came to be. And so Aziza, named an influencer by the Chronicle of Philanthropy, is the executive director of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. She has a long list of accomplishments here. I will notice that she served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and the Executive Service Corps recognized her with the Megan G. Cooper Leadership Award. I guess you currently don't serve on Mayor Eric Garcetti's Interfaith Advisory Council, but and you're a volunteer mediator with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, and you're the executive director of New Ground. And then Andrea Hodos is the associate director of New Ground. She's co-facilitated New Ground's flagship professional fellowship since 2016. Is trained as a facilitator with Resetting the Table through its partnership with the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. Her creative project, Sinai and Sunnah, Women Covering, Uncovering, and Recovering, initially brought her into the realm of Muslim-Jewish engagement. So first of all, can we welcome Aziza and Andrea to All Saints Church? So, and I don't know which one of you wants to start first, but just to sort of tell your story. Okay, Aziza, here, let's, you got to flip. There you go. And just tell us about yourself and tell us about New Ground and how you all got started.
Thank you for the space and for the time to just be able to dive in together and create community together. New Ground is really all about community and what it means to show up right now as people who care with really big open hearts that right now feel like they're breaking open. I'm a mix of so many things, and I think we all are, and we hold multiple identities all the time. I am the daughter of a Palestinian Muslim man and a Christian woman who is with me today, who came to visit me from the Midwest. As a surprise, I saw her in my living room on Friday, and I just started to weep in her arm. And I think of how important it is to have people that we can weep with and be with, especially during these hard times. But when we were growing up, my parents made a clear decision that they were going to raise us Muslim, but I attended all of the Christian services with Mom. And we lived in Jordan. And so it always felt like there was a divide that I had to cross. That I was something where somebody didn't want to accept something about somebody that I loved. It could have been my parents, could have been somebody else who's a loved one. And that desperation and need to know that that other person also belonged in the tapestry because they deserved love too. And I think we're really at this poignant moment right now where I'm looking at people that I love and they're in such deep pain and they can't see the pain of other people that I love. and how essential that work is right now. That we all just want to belong, and we want to know that our lives are sacred. And so it feels like my parents kind of made the decision for me, but that every time I want to walk away from the work, God tells me, no, here you go. And that we have to walk, and we have to call to people with love. And so New Ground is based off of a lot of really hard work. Some of the folks in the earlier days, Virginia Classic has been in a lot of the earlier meetings. They were talking about a couple of decades ago, and even before that, where we saw the work of Dr. Maher Hathout, Reverend Regis, and Leonard Bierman, of all of blessed memory, and how they really worked hard to still be together, and how there were moments of fracture. And I remember being here at All Saints Church, and here, down upstairs, and all sorts of other rooms, where we were talking right in the midst of the hardest moments. And bearing witness to one another, but bearing witness in a way that didn't diminish, but instead allowed the holding of space for one another. And so New Ground learns from those efforts and from where the fractures are, because right now we're really fracturing in really awful ways, and we really need to step into this. And so New Ground really focuses on professionals coming together, high school students coming together, people in community coming together, and having a longer arc experience, but really where compassion is at the center, where we can hold one another and also hold ourselves, that the full integrity, there's nothing in me my identity that is off the table, and there is nothing in Andrea's identity that is off the table. It is very much in the room. And so that's my nutshell, and I'm sure Andrea will cover more.
Hello, that working? So I'm going to do something coming off of your prayer, and I'm going to give you a little notice to come up with a little something. But your prayer made me think about what I did this morning. One of the morning practices, not M-O-U-R, not that morning, but early morning practices. I don't pray as much as I wish I did, but I have been every morning grounding myself in some of the morning blessings. And I'm going to sing for you a little bit, one of those. The words are Elohai Nishama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. God, the soul that you have put in me is pure. And then there's some lovely rituals of washing the hands and saying a blessing. It's about the goodness of our bodies and the capability of our bodies and our gratitude toward God for putting us in these bodies. I'm not going to do that part. I'm just going to sing Elohai Neshama. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi. Back to Aziz. Just a moment. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but it seems like we should all get equal time.
I appreciate that a lot. In my tradition, cover my hair because it is a prayer. It's part of how I show reverence to God. And so I would just ask you to feel the words. This is actually the prayer that Moses is named, like it's quoted in the Noble Quran, and it's the prayer that Moses gave when he was commanded by God to go speak truth to Pharaoh, the greatest oppression of all times, who was giving was doing awful things to Jewish children and Jewish babies. And it just feels especially relevant right now. And so Moses says, God, open up my chest. Help me ease my path in front of me, and untie this knot from my tongue, and raise my brother to be an aid to me, and that we can all come together. That's the rough translation out of order. And it starts in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. صدق الله العظيم. آمين.
I actually want to start with an All Saints story. I grew up, my husband grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a Jewish community, in a very religious Jewish community. And I grew up in Western Massachusetts, a town called Greenfield on Route 2 and 91, if anybody knows that area. The first 3 times I met my future father-in-law, the only thing he could say to me is, tell me, why would Jews move to somewhere where there are no other Jews? So I grew up in a town that was very Irish Catholic, Polish Catholic, and the WASP live up the hill with us. We lived on the hill. And we had moments when we would be invited by a friend of ours who was a pastor to kind of celebrate as guests for Christmas, and that was very meaningful. But a lot of the time it was really hard for me as a Jew growing up, kind of around many Christians who really didn't understand. And my husband and I come often for Mass here, and there was one night we were here, and it was Reverend Bacon's last sermon, where he stood and said, we do not believe in, now I'm blanking on the name, supersessionism. And it was a very important moment for me. I felt seen, I felt in partnership, really for the first time in my life with Christians. And I'm so grateful. And I remember watching the pageantry and just tears streaming down my face because I felt safe. I felt safe. And that safety is really hard for all of us in different ways. In this moment, I'll tell you in a moment how I came to be involved in New Ground, but in this moment, all of our deepest traumas have been triggered and are happening in real time. Israeli Jews who have both Holocaust backgrounds and families from North Africa where there was a lot of violence at certain moments toward Jews, which led people to land in that place. And that was all brought up, including trauma from especially the Second Intifada, where buses and cafes were blowing up on a regular basis. So that was all re-triggered. And what happened in the kibbutzim, it's important for me to say, I know there's a lot of information and misinformation there. The things that happened in the kibbutzim really happened, and they were really a reminder of deep traumas from the past. Palestinian trauma there, Palestinian trauma of annihilation and of erasure. And now there is deep, deep, unimaginable loss. My friend has lost 69 family members in the last week. And she's still speaking with me, which I feel is an act of deep grace. I don't feel it's owed to me at all as someone with deep connections to Israel. And yet, she still knows that I'm with her, and she's still willing to be with me. Am I? Yeah, you can still hear me. There is deep trauma for Jews in the diaspora that people will abandon us. And people, I think especially people who have been in liberation spaces that they thought were also about their own liberation and not just about other people's liberation. Many of us are feeling that people don't really see and understand, that they don't no longer have capacity to hold compassion for Jewish civilian life, that it just isn't seen because of some of the polarization we're experiencing in our movements. I want to let Aziza speak to the trauma of Palestinians in diaspora, Palestinians who left, who were kicked out, who were chased out in 1948 and have not really had a chance to be there, and what they're hearing as they hear, just move, just go into Egypt for a little while, and then you can come back. I want to let you speak to that. And then I also will let you speak, but I want to say in my work in New Ground over the years, each year, I think I understand better the trauma of post 9/11 on American Muslims, the fear, the sense of surveillance, of silencing, and of potential identity-based violence. And I think I understand it, and every year I realize there's a layer to it I didn't get yet. It is very deep. And all of these things are being triggered, and they're being borne out to one degree or another in real time. So the trauma is self-reinforcing. And yesterday when I was processing with friends on Shabbat, this image came to me, and I need you to hold this for a second. I use my hands. So I don't know, how many of you remember that game that had like little magnet pieces, and it was like a man's face, and you could put the thing underneath, and the magnets would just go, and you could make beards and eyebrows and mustaches and all kinds of things. Well, what I'd like you to imagine right now is all of those magnet chips and these two magnets that just went whoosh like this. And all of the magnet pieces that are surrounding these poles and making it really hard, as Aziza was saying, for people to see one another's real pain. And I would say in this moment it's about pain, but part of our work is to see one another's pride and joy. We're not in that moment, but that's part of our work. Really being in relationship with someone is knowing what makes them proud, even if it can be challenging for you. What brings them joy, and what brings them deep pain. And right now we're in helping one another to have that capacity to hold one another's pain. And there's a lot of it. So that's our moment right now.
I think having spaces to be able to name the things that hurt is so critical. Especially where we can hold it in the same space together. Because at the beginning, right shortly after October 7th, we were even looking for just news sources of describing the things that had happened. And it was so hard. There was, even though you thought you knew what was going on, it was like an alternate reality on different news sources. And being able to say, it is so hard, as a Palestinian in diaspora, to hear some of the same talking points, or just go to another place and then you can come back. Come back where? my family was forced off of our land in 1948, and now it's turned, there are beautiful, massive trees that were planted after they bulldozed our house. And yes, those trees are beautiful, and there is no place to go. Like, it's clear that we're erased from the history. But that feels so small compared to what I'm hearing about the children in Gaza. Like, when I look at the faces of children's faces covered in powder, and they're crying, and I just want to do something to stop. And then I think about the kids, it's enormous, and it's like, I know we have to stand forward and we have to do something, and it doesn't feel like it's fast enough. And yet, I also know my friends who are also in Israel who are going to they're literally there for their friends who have just buried their children. And it's not that pain is equal. It never, ever is. And it's a dangerous trap when we start saying things like that. But it's really essential that we also hear the stories of people, human beings. There was forgive me, I've got a lot of people's ideas in my mind, and so I think it's important to just make sure that the wisdom comes out in the room. There's a poet last week that I heard, and as he was speaking, he was saying, everybody falls into the same trap. We're speaking and saying, I'm so sorry, but I feel like that's part of it. It's like the fog that comes into the brain in deep grief, and being able to make your way through it. But he was saying things like, and I see this in my responses as I'm reaching out to people, the attempt at compassion that can be received by, yes, and if only Hamas was didn't do this. And it's a wall, and it's a defensive wall, and I know why it's there. What would we, not his response to that particular, because you can put it in every context, every place. But what he was saying was, I wonder if collateral damage, if we would feel the same way if it was our loved one who we were burying. If it was our loved one, would that count as collateral damage? No. And the only reason why I can look at the different news sources, to be honest with you, is because I have relationships with people that I care about. And there's many people that I care about. And I look at people and I see the news, and I know that as an activist at heart too, I have to do something of consequence. But what I've also seen is that in our spaces, we've really, when we're meeting people in their grief, it's important to bear witness in the way where you're meeting them where they are. And so it's maybe individual conversations, maybe it's convening people in groups, just of affinity groups, maybe it's Muslims, maybe it's Jews, maybe it's Christians, maybe it's whatever the combination of the affinity is, or maybe it's across. And the people who are willing to be in a space that's across are interestingly, are the people who are also needing to care and tend for other people, and they need to be rejuvenated too. And that is also holy work. And so how can we make sure that we are actually making sure that we're investing in making sure that people who are connectors and bridge builders are not getting exhausted and are replenishing so that we can all step into this work?
I want to just give a couple seconds. A couple weeks ago, I was so blessed to be invited to a group that you both led of about 25 of us who were Muslim, Jewish, and a couple Christian faith leaders. And I won't share what was said in that space, but what I loved about that time was you provided a time for Muslims to speak with one another and the rest of us to listen, and then for Jews to speak with one another and the rest of us to listen. And that was such a gift for me, because you talk about sacred ground, and the vulnerability, and the words that keep coming up are trauma and grief. And so just a couple, and then just take this wherever you want to go, is where are you finding the spaces, both sort of in affinity groups, but also together, to process trauma and grief so we're not isolated in that. And then I have experienced our culture here in America as one that is often deeply traumatized, but has a lot of trouble admitting even to ourselves that we're traumatized. And like, I think we're all traumatized from COVID, and we're trying to pretend we're not. And I look at what's happening in Gaza and other places, and it's just like, these are deeply traumatized people on every possible side. So where do you see that conversation happening? Where does trauma healing look like here and also there?
So I want to come back to my magnet metaphor, and also my experience here that I shared with you. There was something about being seen that made me feel safe. And this is the work in our space. The work in our space is about holding deep compassion for self and deep compassion for others. That when we can create spaces that allow for that allow people to be seen as they want to be seen, that will allow them to see others, it creates a bridge even across differences. I think people are seeing this polarization that's quickened and hardened in many ways, and they're really seeking something different. They're looking for a location, a space, to be able to acknowledge the different kinds of pain, and they are different, and the different kinds of dehumanization, which is different, but it's all dehumanization. There was an article in the New York Times that I think that the outpouring that we've received of gratitude for this story, the number of people who've reached out and said, I cried when I was reading this story. I think people are hungry to see different models and to have an address that says, we value humans, and we are all humans. I can speak from my place as a Jew who's been with many Palestinians. I'll tell you a story. Sunday night, that first Sunday night, after we went to this circle that was an interfaith circle, I had not shopped. No, there was negative food in our refrigerator, and so I went to Trader Joe's. And I actually had just received a text from my friend who has the same friend I was talking about, and in 24 hours she had lost 16 of her friends and family. And it had been so wonderful to be together in the interfaith space and just to share space and share grief and reconnect with the people who were able to come to that space. Not everyone is able to do that right now, and that is okay. We're meeting people where they're at. I froze. It took like a couple of texts to friends and talking with one of the Trader Joe's guys who helped me find the coconut milk, which I was standing right in front of, before I was able to unfreeze enough to like remember what I needed to shop for and how how we cook for ourselves in our house. And I was at the checkout, and there was a bagger and a checkout person, and it was Trader Joe's. Says, "How's your evening?" And I just looked at them and said, "I work with Muslims and Jews, And they just looked at me and said, "Oh, we're so sorry." And I thought they got it. And I mentioned the Palestinian 6-year-old boy who had been murdered in Chicago because he was a Palestinian boy. And the bagger looked at me and said, "There are Palestinians in Chicago?" And it's important in this context for us to know that deep pain of erasure that Palestinians, in particular Arabs and generally Muslims, feel often in our U.S. environment. Along with the pain that my people are holding right now, as many people are rejoicing in the death of our people, and that is also happening. I was going somewhere with this. Okay. Interfaith. So there are these spaces. There was the space that we convened, and this was a moment of testing our work. We were created. I've been involved with New Ground in certain ways since the beginning because my husband was the president of the PJA, or he's on the PJA, Progressive Jewish Alliance board, when the Progressive Jewish Alliance and the Muslim Public Affairs Council said, leaders in the city, interfaith leaders, Muslims and Jews, can no longer sit at the table to talk about housing issues or homelessness or hunger because they can't talk with one another, and we need to change this. And that was what New Ground was born out of. So my husband was part of those conversations. We were part of a precursor. When they started New Ground, I was too old to do the fellowship. And as soon as they opened the upper age limit, Aziza Facebook messaged me to say, "Andrea, I wonder if you know anybody who might want to do," and I think before she even pressed the button, I said, "Are you kidding? I'm there." And then the Jewish leader for our high school, I had been a high school teacher for almost a decade, and the Jewish facilitator of our high school group was not able to continue for the year, and they were like, the first session was just 2 Muslim facilitators, and so they like invited me on board. So the year I did the fellowship myself, I also became the facilitator for the high school program for a couple of years, and then that was that's history, and here I am full time. I'm full time in my heart and in my personal life, which my husband calls my work balance. But it's where I live. I mean, I have deep connections to this work in many different ways. So I feel like we proved the concept. We proved concept, even though we haven't done an official evaluation yet, and we're going to do that, and we're going to find out how our fellows have taken this work and enacted it in their own lives. But the fact that we were able to bring 25 leaders to the table, and they were able to say the hardest things, or some of the hardest things, to one another, and everyone stayed in the room. And I think most people felt at the end, as uncomfortable as it was, they felt more connected. Most people. And they will come back. Many of them will come back. And I feel like that is kind of proof of concept, that this is important to keep our city healthy, in a healthy place, in a moving forward, healing place when we're able to do that work. And then I would say, I'm going to leave it to you to share the rest of what we're doing.
Great. And so to leave right where you left off is that actually one of the rabbis who attended the gathering, literally the next day, her Shabbat service, or what she said there, literally leaned right into that. And what it means to speak to creating healing space for each other, to listen across divides. Emil, I think a lot of brain science could actually be really helpful to give us context here. And so Emil Brunei, who really studied people's brains in conflict in really in-depth ways, showed that people, when they have too much empathy, when we have a lot of empathy for our own people and we don't see each other, and literally can't see across, those are the conditions for violence. And we're in it right now. And And so, I mean, you heard about the Palestinian boy who was killed by a landlord who used to play with him, and his mom was stabbed. And so, and you hear story after story about people being harassed and yelled at, and all sorts of terrible things that are happening on college campuses, to Jews, to Muslims, to Sikhs. We are all in this, and we're all in this in really awful ways together. And so the thing that I think Emil's work really speaks to is that the way it's the people who are able to hold on to their story and still hear another story and empathize with others, that's where resilience comes from. So as we try to lean into what it means to have social cohesion right now, that's not just lip service, that's essential. And for all of us to lean into that. And so creating that space with faith leaders and for them to continue to talk about it in their congregation. And then also for other places, like I know a lot of the people who attended the space, like the healing space that we talked about in the park, kept messaging us in the next week, and they were like, I was able to show up this week in really hard places because of that gathering, because I was seen by my people. And my people, just the circle expanded in such a radically different way of like the us and them that we keep hearing. And so New Ground has really catapulted. Like we've held at least 11 different convenings. We're not just doing it with people who have been in our space, we're also doing it with our board of directors. And we're constantly checking in as staff. Like, what does it mean to take care of each other in a trauma-informed way? And so, like, for instance, there are moments where you just need to trust people. If they say, I'm not ready, like, they're not ready. And so Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey have this book, What Happened to You? Bruce Perry makes the argument that if somebody who has been traumatized, wants to stop talking, you actually need to stop talking because you don't want to do more harm. And when it's the moment they want to talk again. But like serving the person and their healing journey is essential right now. And for all of us to pay attention to our own bodies too. And then what Andrea and used to let us off so beautifully too with prayer. Like prayer is really critical for literally the healing process to take hold. And singing is essential. But hearing ourselves reflected, it helps us release some really important things. And so we're trying to do like tension, the important tension that we're sitting with, we really need it to start to evaporate. And so I think it happens in the form of gathering and it happens in the form of one-on-one. But what I was actually struck by that I knew was important, but I wasn't anticipating the response in this way, was that with the New York Times article, we've had people reaching out to us say, I have never ever felt that the written word could have hit me so profoundly in this moment. And just putting yourself out there and like moving in, I think that's another kind of space that we can create for each other.
And Andrea, I know you've got some thoughts. Andrea.
I want to share, one of the things that we do these cohorts and then they go off and we don't have the capacity to do quite as much work with them as we want to be able to do. So in a lot of the time we've been reaching out, inviting people to intra-faith spaces, some on Zoom, some in real life. Some people have been showing up for that. Some people just need to be in touch with us and just reach out to us to let us know they're thinking of us, or us reaching out to them, but they're not really ready to come back into the space because even the intra-faith space can be very challenging. So for people who are deep in it, for people who have family members who are currently being held hostage, for people who have, that would be Jewish families, maybe some with Holocaust backgrounds who know people who have been killed or are being held hostage in Gaza, for Gazans who have family members on the ground, we cannot expect them to come back to this space. We can just keep reaching out to them. But we don't know always how the alumni are doing in relation to one another. And last night, after Shabbat was over, I went on the internet for the first time, and 'cause I turned my phone off on Friday afternoon, and I received this beautiful message, which really did matter to me, and I want to share it with you. This is from one of our Jewish fellows from about 5 years ago. She said, "Many of us from our cohort have been reaching out to each other individually. I thought you might find that comforting to know, in case you weren't aware. Muslims and Jews, you are doing great, important, lasting work." And that was really important to hear, because sometimes there's silence, like we just don't know. And I think it's really important for everyone who's feeling like they're isolated, like there's silence around them, which a lot of people are feeling right now, that sometimes you need to give yourself grace, and sometimes you need to give your other people grace. And if you feel that someone's been silent, sometimes it may be you they need to hear from first, and then they may return with, "I just didn't know what to say." And if you are someone if you are in this room and you're a Christian person, and you have Jewish friends, and you have Muslim friends, and you haven't yet reached out to them, you absolutely can do it. It's okay to make a mistake. That's a really important part of our space, to give one another grace and say, "I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. This must be so deeply painful. And I'm here if you want to talk, and no pressure to reach back." That's all you need to say. So I just want to encourage you to do that. That's really what we're encouraging our people to do. And I think they're doing it.
So that's really, because we talked beforehand about how you really wanted to leave us with a call to action. And do you want to say anything more about that, Aziza?
I would love to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So everything Andrea just said, Esther Perel also has some thoughts that I think are important for people to lean into. She talks to some of the trauma and the way Andrea articulated it in such a poignant way. But what's missing from the discourse, from the tapestry that is really awful right now, is compassion, and being able to be is the leaning in with compassion. And it's the one thing that can help release the hardening. And so that call to please name at least 2 friends, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, whoever, even friends who are hurting, just call them. It's not like just a nice thing that you're doing. It's actually the part that will soften the hardness. And it's hard. Every time I have one of those calls, it takes everything out of me, and I have to find another way to replenish. And it can start with a text, it can start with an email, but it's the one thing that will actually help soften. And just be ready. Like, when people have big responses, that's usually a trauma response. And that's where grace comes in. That's where love comes in. And if you have a little bit of extra breath right now in you, like grounded breath, please be reaching out to people. Like, all of us depend on it. I'm looking at the way that people are talking about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism right now in America, and dear Lord, it scares me. It scares me because we're splitting hairs about something that is not okay, that can never be okay. And we have to be able to soften that, and the way through is compassion.
Right now, we're gonna say goodbye to our online folks. Everyone, bye to our online folks, because Keith needs to get over to the church. But we're gonna stick around here for a few more minutes. I'd love to have a chance for you to ask questions.